The last time a government minister was interviewed here at RTE, someone resigned. And so I know many of you are looking forward to what happens when my next guest expresses no confidence in the host of the show tonight. Say a prayer for all on board as we welcome Minister of Transport and Communications and the leader of the Green Party, Eamon Ryan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Lots to talk about. I hope you don't mind. We haven't met, we haven't chatted before. Can I take you back to a young Eamon?
Yeah.
I've got a wee picture here I'd like to talk about. This is you in your in your smoking hot model phase here, Eamon. When was this taken?
1987. I was in China, as you can see. I give a background. I was like a lot of us in the 80s were out of the country travelling. Or I left a good job. I went to the States following friends, and then I went to Australia, and I came home through China, and I was in heaven. I mean, there were a lot of bikes around, which suited me.
Is this where you got the idea from?
Yeah, it did. It was one of the times, actually, because it was fantastic. People were still in mouse suits. It was just a completely different experience. I was running out of money. I met a Czech student who sold me his rail ticket to Berlin. I got a train from Beijing to Berlin, and I hitched home from there, pretty much. And it was about the best time of my life, because I was really living. Very exciting. But you know, the funny thing is, I was also really happy because I was going home. Like, I remember, I'll never forget landing in Dunleary. You know that when you come into Dunleary, people remember, used to be into Dunleary, you see the church spires, and it was good to be home, but I loved that time.
And that would have been before you would have thought of getting into politics?
Yeah, long before.
Yeah. I didn't realise this, but when you were a kid, you had a stammer, which isn't really something that marries up with going into public speaking and the world that you ended up in.
Yeah, I've spoken about this to people who have similar circumstances. A lot of people have stutters or stammers, and I had a bad one when I was a young kid. My mother tried to cure it in every which way. I remember she brought me to a doctor once, and I remember as a kid, the doctor said something about speech is like a flowing tap, and you've got a stick stuck in the tap with a flow, and every time you stutter, you have to take the stick out. And I was doing that like as a 15-year-old, and it just never worked. But then she brought me to a child psychologist in Rathfarnham, and for a series of sessions, and literally, under hypnosis, with the kind of hypnosis clock.
What, the actual watch, yeah?
And he brought me in a hypnotic state, I can remember it like it was yesterday, back to when I must have been about 6 or 7. And I was in my bedroom, and my parents were rowing outside in the hall, in the landing. And a bad row, and I wanted to go out and say stop, but I felt I couldn't. And under the hypnosis, I was bawling, crying. I was back in the moment as a 6, 7-year-old boy. And he said, you can say whatever you want. And you can, he just reassured me. And I know that sounds a bit corny, but literally throw away your crutches. My stutter started to go away. The proudest possession, I think, in my mother's house, my dad's house as well, was my mum had it. A year after that moment when I started to lose the stutter, I won an award for the most improved debater in school. And it was a tiny little plaque. And that was on her mantelpiece. And it still comes back. I still stutter. And I don't mind it so much. I mean, it's still awkward. It's on certain words. It's weird how it comes. Often related to, my mother's hometown, I tend to stutter on Macroom. But it's weird how for me, it was psychological. And there are others. I know Simon Coven, I think, spoken about his stutter, and Joe Biden has had a stutter. So actually a lot of people do.
And overcome it.
Yeah.
You strike me as somebody who succeeding against the odds is something you've always been set up to do. I mean, when you got into green politics, it wasn't exactly fashionable. People would have been calling you crusties and tree huggers and all this type of stuff. What was it like back then?
It was shortly after I got home. It wasn't, that trip changed me. I kind of came back, and I suppose I was really keen, because I was already, when I was 16, we did a course on nature, and back then, that was 1979, we knew about the destruction that was being done, and if we didn't change our ways, we would lose half of nature. And sure enough, 50 years later, we have lost half of all wildlife in the intervening 50 years, as was predicted. And in the late 80s, when I joined the Green Party, we knew about climate change. I always joke about it. John Gormley wrote a book in 89, I think it was. And the chapter on that and climate change, you could take out and you could publish today and it'd be still right up to date because the science hasn't changed. It's like the science of physics. It's real. It's clear as day. So yeah, for 30 years, I've been working on that more now. What is it, 35 years?
And still, there are some people who, would be saying what you're doing isn't exactly their cup of tea. I mean, just yesterday, we had this man who came out with this. This was Michael O'Leary. I think he came up with this picture. When you see stuff like that, how does that make you feel?
It doesn't bother me. Because, to be honest, I'm looking forward to meet him. I was looking to meet him, so I'm meeting him.
You've never met him?
No, I've asked to meet him a couple of times. It never happened for whatever variety of reasons. But I think we're going to meet next week or the week after. So I'll listen. I wouldn't let that get in the way of sitting down, and because there's serious things we need to talk about. How do we make aviation sustainable? But one thing I'd say to you, well, firstly, at the moment where we are in the world is a scary place, because while the science hasn't changed, what's actually happening in the planet is starting to be really of concern. We're already this year over what was the safe limit of 1.5 degrees. Now, maybe it might come back down, but and the average sea temperatures are rising in a way that no one expected. So we're in very, very uncharted and, to be honest, terrifying waters. But at the same time, May Robinson says true, at the same time as that terrifying scientific reality is unfolding, there's also an opportunity unfolding, or a path we can see where we could actually avoid the worst of it. And the Irish people, I don't think that's reflective of the Irish people. The Irish people, we did this really detailed survey, the EPA last year, 4,000 people interviewed. And there was a follow-up one this year, which was just published on Wednesday. 85% plus of the Irish people, they know climate change is real. They want to be part of the solution. 3% are what you might call climate deniers. And you know what? There's no difference between rural and urban, between young and old, between rich and poor. And
Well, let me ask you about that. You're talking about, problems and solutions. I'm flying in every week to do this show. I've also got solar panels on my house. I've got an electric car. Am I the problem or am I the solution?
We need to get away from that. I mean, listen, I'm flying to climate conferences as well. So if we do this as you're the problem and is what you're doing sustainable? Well, that won't work for a variety of reasons. Firstly, people will just sense of guilt, and also you can't kind of save the planet, what I do. It's very hard to make that connection. But also, we won't make the scale and the leap if it's all about the individual. It's system change we need. System change for the better. And government has a key role in that, but other actors as well. Just to give a sense of hope, and particularly in Ireland, because we tend to have a lot of time think, we're hopeless at this, we're no good, we're the worst, we're terrible. We're not. We are starting to turn very green in this country. We won't have the final figures until June, but we think last year we'll have reduced our emissions by about 5%, which is what we need to do. And I could just take examples. We have, just to give a few examples, give people a sense of hope. We've been introducing a new rural public transport service once a week for the last 2 years, pretty much. The numbers on public transport, particularly in rural, but across the board, have risen 25% in the last year. We know we've got our own renewable power that we can turn to rather than importing our energy from the Middle East and from Russia. Last year, our emissions from power generation went down 25%. 50,000 homes woke up this year to a much warmer home, even with the snow, because they had improved their house last year with government grants to make it more efficient as well as being good for the climate. 100 homes a day are putting solar panels on the roof. So there's change happening. And the way we'll do it, rather than putting you're all the problem, it has to be change for the better. It has to be change in a way that saves you money, makes a better home, creates a sense of community, And that's not impossible. That's within reach.
It's not impossible. I mean, my mum grew up on a farm. This week we had farmers protesting in Cork. You're talking about trying to make a change. What would you say to those farmers protesting down in Cork? I mean, what is it? Almost 40% of the greenhouse gases comes from agriculture. Do they have to just suck that up, or do you have any sympathy for them?
More than sympathy, they're going to be the frontline heroes in the climate change because they have the expertise in how you manage land. It's not just climate. We also have a biodiversity crisis, that loss of nature I mentioned earlier. And we also have pollution
what would you say to them, though? They're protesting at the minute and they're thinking their livelihoods are going to be lost.
And I think the future livelihoods are going to be by going green. We trade on an origin green brand. You can't trade on a false brand. That'd be the biggest crime. And I think particularly we need a new generation of young people to go into farming and forestry and make sure that they get an income by protecting nature as well as providing food. Can I ask you a question? Who's on the farm now? Is there a young person farming it?
No.
That's the problem. We need a whole new generation of people to go into farming. And they won't go in unless you can be certain you've got a good livelihood. And I think that livelihood will come when they go green, rather than going in an intensive way, which isn't green and which we don't, that's not what our expertise is. That's not what our country is. We're the green country, 40 shades of green. Farming will be part of that future in a green way, I'm sure.
But people in the world aren't really eating much less meat, and it's going to have to be produced somewhere. And so if you're saying to Irish farmers, you got to reduce your quota, is it not just, are we not just moving the problem around?
We'll still, listen, Ireland's climate and Ireland's environment is perfect for growing grass. It's what, I mean, we need to do diversify in a variety of ways, but we will grow grass and we will need animals, and there's a role for livestock. But it does have to be one which protects nature and also improves water quality. We have a real issue with water quality. I grew up, when I was in that photo was taken, vast majority, 80 plus 90% of our rivers and our lakes were pristine. We've lost almost all of them. And we need to get that back. And farming needs to play a part in that. And I think one of the ways we give farming income is you diversify. They will make money from energy. They will make money from putting solar panels in the farm and from having some forestry, not stopping farming, but agroforestry, a mix of the two. They can make money in anaerobic digestion where we create our own gas, biogas rather than importing it, through clever management of the land. And it's the knowledge that farmers have of their land which is the expertise we need to help address the environmental crisis we're in.
If someone's watching this at home and, you know, they're turning the thermostat down and they're trying to eat less meat and, you know, they're trying to, you know, go electric with their cars and all of these things, and they're seeing China's just building more and more coal-fired power stations, what would you say to those people who say, it doesn't really matter what we do?
Think about it another way. Well, firstly, you have to remember, there's a race here as to this new industrial revolution, this new opportunity. China's way ahead. China's investing more in renewable power, wind, solar, than the rest of the world put together. American business is investing $1 trillion in the same green transition. We have to be careful here we don't fall behind. Now, we're good at this, but there's another way of looking at it. Think of it another way. You could look and say, why should I do it when someone else isn't doing it, whatever? Think of us, every single street, every single parish, every single farm is the front line, is the key place, is the place that's most important in the world. And if we're restoring nature in our own valleys, in our own farm, in our own river, in our own community, that's not a negative, that's not a hardship, that's something we want to do anyway. And that gives us a sense of purpose, that gives us a sense of mission, a sense of, well, pride. And so whatever China does, that's the Chinese. Now, the Chinese have to do it too. I went to China last year, went back actually, because they're important on the climate side, and I'm involved in climate negotiations. They're threatened. Their rivers are at risk because the glaciers from the Himalayas are melting, and their people are at risk. And similarly, right across the world, even I was in Dubai for the climate talks this year, they're at risk from sea level rise. It is one of the few areas in the world today, in a world that is driven with division, with the horrific things that are happening in Gaza and the Ukraine. One of the few signs of multilateral cooperation still is in climate, where we are still a united nations, not divided nations. And I think we need to be good at this for ourselves, and it's going to be good for us as community for social justice as well as for ecological justice. So why wouldn't we do it?
If you don't mind, you can't really make a difference unless you're in government. You've been in government for the past 4 years. If you look at record homelessness, if you look at the housing crisis, if you look at waiting lists in hospitals, all of that has happened in a government that you're part of. How do you square that circle?
Well, hold on a sec now. Firstly, and we work well together as a government. We have our differences, which are not easy, but actually it's a very good functioning government, in my mind. And we managed COVID in a way that I think international reports are saying actually was one of the best. We also managed the cost of living crisis, which wasn't easy because of the war in Ukraine, in a way that really did protect the Irish people. But come back to the first thing which you said. We just published the statistics this week about our health statistics. There is a huge improvement in Irish living health standards. We're putting a lot of money into it. But even just to take one measure, the last 10 years, our life expectancy has increased by 2 years. Now, if I was to offer you, I'll give you 2 more years of life, what would you pay for it? Do you think that's success or failure? That's real success. Similarly, housing. There is real change happening in terms of the building of housing. 33,000 houses last year. It'll go again this year and again the year after. So I stand up for the government. This is a government that is delivering.
You're happy to go to the doors of the next election with that message that things are getting better?
And also that it's also going green. But you can never be satisfied. You can never do enough in government. But this is a time to be on the pitch, not to be a hurler on the ditch. This is a time to actually, yes, go into government and do everything you can to address the real big challenge of our time, which is the ecological crisis, but also to deliver housing and health for our people. And we're doing that.
Before we let you go, there's got an election coming up. If this government doesn't form the next coalition, if Mary Lou comes calling, would you be happy to form the next government with her?
Explain my view on that. The need for action on climate and protecting nature is so great that we cannot wait. And if we're going to make the scale of change we need to make, because it's a huge leap we need to make, then it needs everyone. It's not just, if it's divisive politics, it won't work.
So is that a yes?
So on that basis, yes. We'll work with every party. This has to belong to everyone. This won't work if it's divisive politics the way it is in the States. So yes, we would work with Sinn Féin. Yes, we work well with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Yes, we would work with Labour and the Soc Dems. Because, as I said, this is a time to act. And by acting, you address the fear. You address this real anxiety people have about the environment. You get out and act. And we are doing that and will continue to do that.
We are sadly out of time. Thank you so much for coming in, Minister. One more time, Eamon Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay.